All right, I guess we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Judy, you want to call the roll, please?
Senator French.
Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McEwen.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Excused.
Chairman Bachman.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. First bill up for consideration today is House Bill 98, Property Tax Homeowners Exemption, sponsored by the Joint Revenue Interim Committee. Anybody from the House? I don't see any House members want to present the bill. Anybody from the agency want to present the bill? And I don't see Senator Pappas was the only one that was on the Revenue Committee. Come on up. Welcome back to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I guess I wasn't really expecting to present this, but I'll walk you guys through it.
Thank you.
The bill, so right now we have a homeowner's tax credit that used to be a homeowner's exemption in statute. That statute hasn't been funded, I believe, since in the 80s. But anyway, this language in this bill would clean up the statutory language that currently exists for a homeowner's tax exemption that has not been funded for many, many years. So basically what this bill, kind of in a nutshell, it gives $50,000 of market value off your residential valuation, which would equate to approximately a little over $300 in tax for a residential homeowner that lives in their house as a primary ownership. Couple of stipulations is you have to be a resident or own your home for 5 years, and you have to live in your home 6 months out of the year, the previous tax year. As far as the Department of Revenue goes, we can administer this in our CAMA system. There is some definite administrative extra duties that a county assessor would have to implement, and I'll leave what they need to do up to the county assessor that probably will testify after me. And also it would do some or require the county treasurers to implement some administrative processes as well. I believe they did amend this bill to begin January 1st, 2024 tax year. And also there is a sunset, I believe, that would repeal this language December 31st, 2025. So there would be 2 years of this bill being implemented as an exemption. And with that, I can stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Oh, we didn't get your name and.
I'm sorry,
title for the
Brian
record.
Judkins. I am the administrator of the Property Tax Division for the Department of Revenue.
Thanks, Mr. Judkins. Gotta keep the formalities going. Any questions for Mr. Judkins?
Yeah.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any idea, you said save about maybe around $300 on your taxes. Do you have is there a number for the entire state, what that would cost if this is implemented?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, the assumptions, I did do the fiscal note on this. We have approximately 244,260 improved residential accounts in the CAMA system. I used some information obtained from the Economic Analysis Division to determine primary ownership. And what it equated to is approximately $35 million that the state would take out of the LISRA account and refund the county assessors or county treasurers. So about 35 million, 34, 35 million a year.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Judkins. Appreciate the help. Thanks for jumping in unexpectedly and did a good job.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to testify? Come on up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Ken Giel, Laramie County Assessor. The Assessors Association is in support of this bill. We voted at our annual meeting, and we are in support of this bill. I won't lie to you and say this is a easy administrative law or proposal. In Laramie County, myself, I probably could have somewhere in between 15 and 20,000 property owners that may be eligible for this. So that's a pretty heavy lift. But as you know, assessors, if we'll get it done if we have to. So we will do that. A few questions that I did have towards the end of the bill on page at the bottom of page 4, going into page 5. I understand the intent there, where a farm or a ranch might be in a corporation and it would still qualify. I do understand that intent. There are some questions that hopefully could be cleaned up in rules. There are ranches that have multiple reses on them. So would every residence get this exemption? Obviously, if it's a ranch hand, that wouldn't be owner occupied. But if it's a partner in the ranch, would they qualify? So something that may be able to be answered in rules, I'm not sure. The other part is they clean that up for the ranches, for corporations. It really doesn't talk about your normal residential property that maybe sits in town. So I would suggest maybe some language from the veterans exemption, and that's found in 3913-105, little c, Romanet 2, and that's where it describes that the house can be in a trust or something like that. The way this bill reads now, I don't know that a house sitting in a trust or a corporation and is owner occupied would be eligible for this exemption. So just maybe a little cleanup there. We administer a program like this, the veterans exemption, as I mentioned before. In Laramie County, we provide service to about 5,000 veterans that come in and apply for their exemption on a yearly basis. So it is doable, and we do know how to administer it. Mr. Judkins mentioned something about the county treasurer, and it does in this bill say the county treasurer shall keep track of the exemptions that were given, and that's on page 3 at the bottom. The county treasurer shall keep track of the exemptions given and then report that to the state treasurer. I'm really assuming that will probably be part of the assessor's tax roll that we turn over to the treasurer on the 3rd Monday in August. So I'm assuming that's where that information would come from for the county treasurer. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giel. Any questions for Mr. Giel? I do have, could you repeat that exemption, where that exemption is? You said 3913-105.
Little
Then
c.
you lost me.
Yep, little c, Romanet 2.
Okay.
And that's language in the veterans exemption there, Mr. Chairman. So maybe that language could be copied over to this bill. Maybe it's not necessary, but it is a question that I did have. And the Department of Revenue might be able to just clean that up in rules anyway, but I just thought I'd bring it up.
Appreciate that. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Any further questions? Any? No? Thank you, sir. Who's next? Mr. Moline, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. Voicing my support for this bill. I realize it's only for a 2-year time frame, but to put another essentially $700 into the pockets of Wyoming residents will be a help. And I really appreciate the online on page 4 and 5 where it deals with the agricultural housing for the owners. so many of my members are incorporated or in partnerships, and I think that helps us out. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Any questions for Farm Bureau?
Thank you.
Well done, thank you. Ms. Harpstreet.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ashley Harpstreet, Wyoming Taxpayers Association. I've spoken on previous bills to this committee on the metrics of how we analyze and measure the benefits of exemptions through our exemption justification analysis. With that in mind, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we oppose House Bill 98, property tax homeowners exemption. WTA believes sound tax policy is framed by a tax structure that is justified, equitable, stable, and transparent. House Bill 98 does not stand for any of these cornerstones, as it is a broad swipe of tax policy instead of targeted relief. I would like to make it clear, we are very sympathetic to the increased valuations some of the residential taxpayers have faced and are very supportive of House Bill 99, property tax refund, and House Bill 121, which is the loan deferral bill I believe you're hearing on Wednesday. However, this is not the vehicle to address this specific and circumstantial issue, as the exemption does not provide targeted relief. It is not means tested or qualified. It is not justified, as according to the Tax Foundation in 2020, Wyoming ranked 46th out of 50th for the lowest taxes paid for owner-occupied housing. This is a costly spending decision for $35 million a year. Mr. Chairman, the biggest reason we cannot support this exemption, it is not stable or sound tax policy, as this bill will take revenue from a stable revenue source in our tax code, which will make the tax structure even more unstable as a whole. Wyoming's tax structure is already unbalanced, and this exemption will further erode the tax base and shift the cost of critical services to other taxpayers. Additionally, the benefits of the exemption do not outweigh or offset a sustained loss of tax revenue created by the exemption. There are no measurable benefits that will provide analysis of the blanketed relief to all residential taxpayers who receive this benefit. Finally, this exemption will create a large administrative burden, as previous testimony. To stand this program up alone for all the owner-occupied residents to qualify, they expect to see over hundreds of thousands of applications. And just in Laramie County alone, they're looking at 20,000 plus applications for exemptions. We stand ready to assist in the evaluation of other proposals in the interim that addressed the unbalanced tax structure and that are low and broad-based. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harpstreet. Any questions? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I want to make sure I heard that correctly. You said we're 46th out of 50,
For 2020 data.
and I'm guessing that being 50 isn't good, being 1 would be good?
No, one would be us having the highest property tax. So we are almost the lowest. 50 is good.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am.
we have
Thank
some
you,
of the
Mr.
lowest.
Chairman.
And in the
Through the
rock.
chair, people. Through the
Oh, I'm
chair.
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm out of practice, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, from the extended weekend.
It's all right. I'll let you guys slide, both of you, but you're both, that's your final warning.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? You did. First time you did. Senator Ide, you have to look in your eye like you got a question.
Thank you, Chairman Biteman. You mentioned fair and equitable. It's not fair and equitable. Would you elaborate on that a little bit? Are you referring to the $50,000 and then it goes to the 25% maximum, 25% of, how does that read right there? It says primary residence up to $50,000 of the fair market value, not to exceed 25% of the total fair market of the property. So is that kind of what you're talking about as being unequitable, or elaborate on that? Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide. So where we're measuring is the residents of Wyoming and citizens of Wyoming already have an extremely low tax burden for the cost of services that we receive. And not all citizens are wanting this exemption. However, I'm sure they will love having an exemption. They are in need of it. And so the property tax relief bills that we're supporting are measured and targeted to those in greater need. Some counties haven't had as high of a assessment go through the roof like yours in Natrona. So we would like to see it more targeted. if that answers your question.
Okay. Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to testify? PAW.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you in the committee. Pete Obermueller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, PAW opposes this bill as well for reasons that we've brought up before, that our look at all of the property tax related bills this year were predicated on trying to ensure that our tax code does not further drive apart the already stunning gap between what minerals pays and whatever everybody else pays. So this bill we would probably move to neutral on this bill if it had some sort of means test, that it would provide some relief to those who truly need it in the residential side. But other than that, it's essentially 35 million that will be shifted to the minerals industry in one way or another. It's only been one, so far only one property tax related bill that's passed the House and Senate this session, and it's been the bill that will increase our taxes by 4 additional mills. And that will continue to just drive it apart. So to put just a number to it, Mr. Chairman, in Campbell County, 90% of the property mineral tax yield is paid by minerals. 90% of the tax yield is paid by minerals. 1%, less than 1% paid by the residential property taxpayer. So there's simply no way to do this, especially in a non-targeted way that doesn't shift it more and more to minerals, that doesn't drive that wedge further and further between what we pay and what everybody else pays in order to provide services that citizens need. Appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Any questions for Mr. Obermueller? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else wish to testify on House Bill 98?
Mr. Chairman, we have one person online.
We have a Zoomer.
We do. We have Dixie Huxtable.
Okay, let's let Ms. Huxtable in.
Huxtable. if
Good
you
afternoon. There we go.
All right, welcome, Ms. Huxtable.
Thank you. And good afternoon, committee, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I really don't have a lot of additional to say. My colleague did a great job. This is going to be an administrative issue for many counties that have limited staff. But we are willing to take that on as long as some of the clarification in the rulemaking or through the bill itself get clarified. The one question was about the ranch, and that was one of my concerns. A ranch corporation that has several members that all have their own house on that ranch. Is each property, is each house going to qualify for it? And then the question about the ownership, as my colleague stated, about whether it's in a non-ag property that is in a trust or in a corporation. So those will need to be clarified, and certainly the department can speak to whether rules can handle it. One thing I did want to say was the benefit of this bill, in our perspective, is that this is an exemption. So the taxpayer never has to pay this portion of the tax, whereas the property tax relief programs, they pay the tax, they submit an application and get a refund. In this scenario, it comes off the top. So we're going to remove that value before we ever send the bill out. And to certain people, that is probably a huge benefit. They don't have to come up with that hundreds of dollars, $300-400. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified. The benefit of the exemption over the other, we think both of them are good. And certainly if this one was targeted, a little bit more would be probably more in line with what some of the speakers have talked about. But the assessors as a whole are in support of this bill, and just stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Huxtable? Seeing none. Thank you. Appreciate your
Thank you.
testimony. Judy, is that it for Zoom? Okay, for this bill. Anybody else in the room? The last chance. Come on up. Welcome to Senate Revenue, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Whiteman. I just want to say that,
Say your name for the record, sorry.
Steve Johnson, I've been a resident here. I was moved here when I was 4 years old, so I'm almost a native. I'm going on 70 years old, but I find it amazing that we are not the 50th lowest tax nation in the state. And the reason to have this bill not go through is that other states, we need to pay as much as the other states. Well, that's not true. We're Wyoming. We need any dollars you can give back to the citizens is what we need. Let us decide where that money goes and not the bureaucrats in charge. Thank you, Mr. Whiteman.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any questions for Mr. Johnson? So are you for or against the bill? Sorry.
I am for the bill.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Okay. I think that does it for public comment. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Well, you better move the bill if you want to do your amendment. Anybody want to move? I'll move the bill. You want to, French moved it, I second it. That's what just happened. Okay, committee discussion, amendments. Senator French?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On page 4, starting on line 22 and going to, well, that whole entire paragraph. My question is, it says a person who occupies a primary residence owned by a business entity primarily formed for the purpose of farming or ranching. If the person is a shareholder or partner of the business entity. So in all these situations, they're saying that the business owns all the houses. Maybe there's 10 houses. I mean, how is that different than, by that restriction, I guess, a house is a house, isn't it? I mean, if there's 5 of us up here on the committee, if we all 5 are in a house, shouldn't that qualify too, even if it's some partnership? I'm just a little vague on that one, if somebody can clarify that for me, thank you.
You want to take a stab at that? Well, Senator McEwen does. Senator McEwen.
That's an excellent question, and it's very perplexing in that we don't have a problem parsing out each of the 5 or 10 houses on the ranch to tax them for property. But now we're having a discussion on how we give all those same 5 or 10 houses in the difficulty the exemption. So it just doesn't seem congruent. If we can tax them all, why can't we exempt them all? Just a thought I'm having.
I smell an amendment coming on. Anybody have an amendment? Senator Ide?
Thank you, Chairman Biteman. Yeah, I'm struggling with this bill here too. There's talks to some people, drafted an amendment. Do you want me to go ahead and kind of talk about that amendment? Here's a couple of extra copies there, whether it helps the bill or the prospects of relief for the homeowners. Essentially what this amendment does is, starting on, page 1, line 2, it takes out primary resident, it takes out primary on line 2. Kind of the same thing throughout the bill, wherever it says primary is deleted and just goes to residence. And then the meat of the amendment is on line 6, page 2. It would cross out up to $50,000 of the fair market value. And then it would just say for property used as a residence, 25% of the total fair market value. That's kind of the the meat of the amendment. And then lines 11 and 12, it would delete at the end of line 11, and no owners shall claim more than one homeowner's exemption in any year. That's deleted. Changes 6 months to 5 months. And then on page 3, line 21, it takes out on line 21, legislative stabilization reserve account, and puts general fund in there. So that's what this amendment does in a nutshell. I'll have a copy of that. Any
I
questions?
think I got it tracked in. Any questions on the amendment discussion? Senator
Sorry.
French.
Mr. Chairman, to Senator Ide, where the last of your amendment, number 37, kind of relates to what I was talking about, I think. Page 4, line 22, delete primary, so it'd read a person who occupies a residence owned by a business. So that would
help that language.
I think that would cover my concern, I believe. So,
I think so.
okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator Wright.
The one thing I didn't mention here also on page 2, line 3, the date changes there from December 31st, 2025 to 2026.
So you're bumping out
The timeline on,
the
The
sunset
exemption.
or whatever?
yeah.
Okay. All right. Further discussion? Ready for the question? Yep, Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, I really like the sentiment behind this bill. I like what it's aimed at doing. But it also appears to me that now not only are we going to the golden goose and collecting every golden egg that it hatches immediately, we're now literally sticking our hand inside the goose to get more out quicker. And I say it that way because I want to help the citizens, but I live in Campbell County. And we survive off mineral extraction, oil and gas. And as we know, we tried to pass some good legislation to help everyone out and the economy. And I look at this and the First Amendment I see, I feel like we're playing a shell game. We're gonna have this tax relief or exemption, but then we're gonna go get it out of the general fund or the LISRA or Carter's liver pills. He's got a coffee can of money somewhere, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, all that money flows into one place. There is no tax relief. There is no tax exemption. We're just moving to where we get more of the tax money from. And we just passed last session a bill to allow Campbell County to stand up Gillette College. And that's fantastic. We got a wonderful college, we're gonna fund it. And part of that came with an increase in property taxes. And it was voted on by the citizens of Campbell County to increase their property taxes. So in my mind, if we pass this bill, we are now going to have the coal mines and the oil fields and the guys that go get gas, and they're going to pay for our new college instead of the people who voted it in. So I want to be a yes on this, but I can't in good faith. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it, Senator McEwen. All right, on the amendment, you guys ready for the question? Are you, Senator Ide, do you have any more comments?
Chairman Biteman, you know, that amendment, I brought it, just people talked about it. It maybe makes the bill better, but I'm of the same sentiments. The good senator next to me here, it's just the golden goose was a good analogy, and he expanded on that a little bit. So I think I'm probably a no vote on the bill as well, so I would withdraw the amendment.
Well, dang, I was liking the amendment.
Did you?
All right, well, my opinion is, well, you can withdraw it if you want to, but I want to make this bill better. This bill has potential. We came down here with a mandate to give people property tax relief, and we're failing miserably. And our options are getting limited by the hour. And so I would be in favor of amending this bill to get it closer to our liking and then making our final decision on third reading, whether or not this thing is the horse to ride or not, because all the horses are dead. But certainly understand Senator McEwen's point as well. I also would like to delete the whole standing committee amendment that the House put in there and go back to the bill as originally written, and then present it to our body and see what they want to do. But
I'd be good with that, as if we, like the other amendment that you mentioned there. So, you know, I'll go ahead and move the bill.
move the amendment.
Move the amendment, I'm sorry.
Keep
Yeah.
it. So let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor of adopting Senator Ide's amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that amendment's been adopted. I have an amendment that I would like to propose that would delete the House Standing Committee amendment in entirety, which gets rid of the sunset date. It gets, takes care of the 40 million backfilling. Like you said, it's just moving, it's a shell game. It's moving money from one pot to another. If you want to, but I'm explaining my amendment first and then we'll, yeah. So that's my amendment. Let's go back, strip it back to the original House Bill 98. Any discussion? Senator McEwen asked if Mr. Obermuller would come up and answer a question for us if you so choose. You don't have to. But he's on fire today, so this could be entertaining. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pretty simple question, and I want to make sure I understand this right. If, I'm going to use a term we love to use, backfill. If that backfill went away, wouldn't that alleviate the stress on the extraction industries to make up for the cut or the exemption? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Obermuller.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it's optional when the committee asks someone to come back up.
We're trying to be.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Senator McEwen, and I appreciate your thought, but it doesn't, in fact, because it doesn't change the fact that $35 million has been eliminated from primarily from K through 12 schools in property tax. K through 12 schools is going to get funded because of Supreme Court cases and political realities. It is going to get funded, and it's going to get funded from somewhere. So to your point about Gillette College, the oil and gas industry and the coal industry both supported the college, but it's pretty easy for the residents to vote for it in that case because they know they're only funding 1% of that. The other 90% is oil and gas. So I mean, taking money from the LSRA to backfill counties and schools and all of that is fine. It's one way to do it. If you take it out of the bill, it's going to be done another way. It doesn't alleviate the problem of the shift, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman. But I appreciate the effort. Really, for us, it comes back down to just the means tested. Do people need it? In some cases, I think probably so. In a lot of cases, probably not. And so it means test it, we're willing to shoulder that. Otherwise, it's just a shift and it's too much for us.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator Pappas, public comment is closed. We're on House Bill 98. We've adopted one amendment and they were working on another amendment, which is to delete the House Standing Committee amendment in its entirely and go back to the original House bill that came out of joint revenue. And Senator McEwen had a question for, Senator McEwen had a question for Mr. Overbuehler. That's why he was up there. So we're on the amendment to delete the Standing Committee amendment. Any discussion? It would be just to delete that. Give you a second to read it. And that one passed. I did. That one Senator Ives, that one passed. Think you know enough to be dangerous? Okay. We'll call the question on the proposed amendment to delete the Standing Committee amendment on the House side. Please say aye. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. So that has been adopted. We're back on the bill as amended. Any other amendments? Any discussion? Mhm. Yeah, we'll take a quick minute so Senator Pappas can read the item amendment thoroughly, so he knows what he's voting on. Judy, could you please call the roll on House Bill 98?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
We're on the bill. Roll call on the bill as amended.
No.
Senator McEwen,
No.
Senator Pappas.
No.
Chairman Beitman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there were 3 noes and 2 ayes on House Bill 98.
Okay, House Bill 98 has failed Senate Revenue Committee. We are on, next bill up for our consideration is House Bill 124, Electricity Generation Taxation, sponsored by Speaker Summers. Anybody see the good speaker? I don't see the good speaker. Any other representatives or co-sponsors of the bill? Seeing none. Okay. Senator Barlow and Senator Case aren't here either. I guess I'll walk us through the bill. An act relating to taxation, amending taxation on the production of electricity as specified, providing applicability and providing for an effective date. Looks like we go into the tax upon production of electricity from wind and solar resources. Imposing a tax on solar. Looks like we're adding and solar or solar. Looks like the rate is going to be the same as wind, which is $1 per megawatt hour. And make sure I'm not missing anything. Looks like this act shall apply to any electricity produced from solar resources for sale or trade on or after January 1st, 2024. And this act is effective July 1st, 2023. Pretty straightforward bill. Is there any public comment? Anybody from Department of Revenue or the agencies that want to discuss this bill?
Good afternoon, Chairman Beitman and Senate committee members. I'm Betsy Hale. I'm the CEO of Cheyenne Leads. Leads is the Cheyenne and Laramie County private nonprofit economic development organization. House Bill 124 is bad for business, bad for future economic diversification in our state, and frankly, bad for Wyoming's decades-old reputation as a leader in the global energy economy and as the #1 business tax-friendly state in the United States. Several of you on this committee have heard me testify on the significant economic impact that data centers and cloud computing companies have had in Wyoming since 2013. I believe you may have received this document on the dais as well as in your email. Please allow me to update you on those numbers, as there is a direct nexus between the investments made by technology companies and the fuels they use to drive Wyoming's economy. Since 2013, 4 of the 7 data centers in Laramie County contribute over $100 million to Wyoming's GDP annually. They have invested over $2.4 billion in capital, and we expect another $2 billion to be invested in the next 3 years. They have paid over $49 million in business and real property taxes. Sales taxes paid on power are more than $20 million, and their 280+ jobs have an average wage of $80,000 per year. Leads is currently working with 7 data center prospects, and when the 2 new Microsoft data centers are fully operational this year, these economic impact numbers that I've just shared with you will only grow exponentially. Power and the price of it is often the #1 cost of operations for these businesses. It is the decision-making point as corporate leaders and site selectors make location decisions. The attraction, retention, and expansion of data center operations to Wyoming is no easy task. Due to their positive economic and fiscal benefits, it's very competitive. There are 16 states which offer investment tax credits, 15 offer property tax abatements, 14 offer withholding tax credits, 31 states offer sales and use tax exemptions on equipment, and 5 have no sales taxes at all. Anytime a generation tax is placed on power, the costs are passed along to the customer, and adding a tax to a company's largest expense at a time when inflation and the rising cost of workforce and equipment hurts Wyoming's reputation as the #1 business tax-friendly state in the country. In 2022, and I'll be referring to this document, which you've also received, Cheyenne Leads hired the Tax Foundation to evaluate Wyoming's business tax competitiveness. The report states nearly 70% of Wyoming's state and local tax collections come from businesses, compared to 44% nationwide. In Wyoming, over 58% of sales tax fall on business-to-business transactions, creating tax pyramiding. In other words, when the solar farm being developed in South Cheyenne comes online, it will sell the power to a publicly traded utility that will pass that cost along to data center and other companies here in Wyoming. They will ultimately pay that proposed generation tax while they are also paying sales tax on that very power. This proposed solar generation tax is called a business input tax. Wyoming's business input taxation is equal to $967 per Wyomingite and is collectively more than what 28 states generate in corporate income tax. This is not a question of parity, but of who pays the tax. As the Tax Foundation report points out, the tax burden on extractive industries is exported to investors and customers across the country. House Bill 124, proposed generation tax, is one that will be borne by Wyoming companies, Wyoming employers. Cheyenne Leads asks for your no vote on House Bill 124, and thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Any questions for Ms. Hale? No. See, Senator McCune quiet. Ms. Hale, I just noticed as we were doing some quick research before the committee meeting on the taxation rate, and I noticed nuclear generation is taxed at $5 a megawatt. Would you support getting rid of that based on your logic?
Well,
here?
Mr. Chairman Beitman, actually, yes, I think that we might want to also look at the wind tax as well. And again, it's really who's paying that tax and how that tax is actually passed on to customers. And it's not just business and industry that would be passed on to, it'd be just regular old consumers.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would argue that any tax is paid for by the consumer eventually. It's not this magical company who says, I want to come work in Wyoming and give you tax dollars so I can look at antelope. And my question is, right now with the data centers here, can you tell me what kind of exemptions and how they're receiving those? Thank you, Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Hale?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, I'm sorry if I didn't say that correctly.
Perfect.
Oh, okay, thank you. Right now, the largest exemption that they receive is the sales and use tax on manufacturing equipment or computer equipment. So there's an exemption for manufacturers on their equipment. There's also an exemption for data center equipment. And that is a very important exemption because the equipment in the data centers and the cloud computing facilities is replaced every 3 years. So that becomes a very expensive investment. And then there is also a data center cost reduction grant. It's a one-time grant, and it can be up to $2 million, but the company has to spend, I believe it's $2.2 million in order to receive that. And it's a rebate. So essentially they've paid for the power and then they'll get it rebated back.
Thank you. Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mhm.
Can I meet with you afterwards and will you tell me how I can sell soup without paying sales and use tax? I'm not a big corporate guy and I don't pay my average employee $80,000 a year. Not even close. I would if I could. But it seems to me we've chosen a darling industry and it does generate money. And I promise you, if you did that for me selling groceries, I could probably wipe Walmart off the map and you wouldn't have to deal with them. I feel like we're picking winners and losers here. And I understand why it's important to the community down here. But at the end of the day, do you really believe it is equitable across all of the business spectrum for the state of Wyoming, especially sales and use tax? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hale?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, I think that what we have to take a look at is our entire tax policy in Wyoming. As an economic development professional, I do understand that we have placed an extreme burden on our petroleum industry, as you've heard from Mr. Obermuller. So I do think there's an opportunity in the future. And I would want to emphasize too that these types of companies, and including our manufacturing companies that use the sales and use tax exemption, they do want to pay their fair share. There's no doubt that they understand that their company and their employees do have an impact on Wyoming. And so it's a question of how do we make sure as we move forward, how we establish tax policy that is fair and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Can we get Department of Revenue, did you have any comments? Sorry, we kind of skipped you there at the onset. I apologize. Didn't give you a chance to, Ms. Hale jumped up so fast, it was, I didn't want to interrupt her. She was on a mission there. But Mr. Fanning, can you give us your thoughts on the bill?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And this new tax would fall under my division. And so just to kind of go back through that bill. So what this does, we already have a chapter 22 in our statutes. And so this kind of merges the wind and the solar into one title where we can administer it. And so if you go back, Mr. Chairman, and look through the bill, you're going to see, so the imposition statute says, hey, tax is going to be on wind and solar. And the reason you don't see the imposition statute, or sorry, the taxation rate in here is because in statute, the taxation rate just says, hey, it's $1 per megawatt hour. And so that kind of includes both the wind and solar. So that's what this bill does, is it's just merging the wind and solar. Right now, we have a $1 per megawatt hour tax on wind. This one would add it to the solar. So, Mr. Chairman, just a couple notes that I had in here. So the first one, I received a lot of feedback. There's an exemption on the wind side of this for up to 3 years before you have to pay the tax. And we have that defined it says electricity produced from a wind turbine shall not be subject to the tax up until 3 years after it's first produced. I did receive some feedback. We have wind turbine actually outlined in our rules where solar would not be eligible for this exemption for the 3 years. So again, I'm not taking a position whatsoever on this bill. It's just something I wanted to note since we're kind of meshing different statutes in here. The second point I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, is it does say this would be effective January 1, 2024. And so essentially what that means is in statute right now, our wind folks, they submit an annual return. It's a calendar return to us. This would be the exact same for the solar industry. So at the end of 2024, the way I read this bill, so you'd have all of calendar year 2024, and then based on the other statutes in here for wind, that return would be due to us by the 1st of February. So, and that would be February 2025. Okay, so I just want to make that clear as to how this bill works. The third point that I had was, so when this bill came out, LSO did a fiscal note as far as how much revenue this would actually generate. I do want to make it clear that this fiscal note did not make it to my desk. For whatever reason, I don't know why or whatsoever, but there would be an administrative impact to my division. So unless this committee or the legislature wants us to do this manual or via Excel or something along those lines, there would be IT funding associated with this. And so I know, Mr. Chairman, you may be tired of me coming up here and mentioning that to you, but that is the impact of introducing a new tax, administering it. And again, I do strongly encourage these returns to go through our normal system because it increases transparency when we get audited to make sure all taxpayer returns are allocated. And so there is this transparency element where we can say, hey, we know exactly where it is, as opposed to on someone's Excel workbook on their computer. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, there was a nuclear question, just very briefly. This also falls within my division, the excise tax. Right now, we currently do not have any folks who have to report this tax to us. Now, there are individuals and companies that are looking to do this, but as of right now, currently, we don't have to do anything with the nuclear reactor tax. It is a different tax rate. So, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Let's go to Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this all through the bill says for wind or solar. So are there any taxes currently applied to solar electricity generation from, from wind?
Mr. Fanning?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, we do. We have about a dozen companies that will submit wind generation taxes to us. While I was anxiously awaiting coming up here, I did do some research. And so last calendar year, we had wind generation folks submit to us $2.5 million rounded to the local level. And then there was $1.7 million to the state level. And again, remember, that's based on the $1 per megawatt hour of generation. And so there is that exemption where you don't have to report to us for 3 years, but you are talking about, $4 or $5 million that comes in from these taxes. Now, I think you will hear from folks behind me that solar generation is not as big as our wind sector here in Wyoming. Evidence as of today outside, so.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I read through the bill, I'm not sure how it falls out for those poor people who signed up for net metering. That may or may go away as, once again, we move the magical balls around. But wouldn't this include some guy doing net metering? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, the answer to that is it depends. In all likelihood, so that you've got to go back to our exemptions for the wind, which would incorporate now the solar industry as well. So 3922-105, that's where our exemptions are found. And so there is an exemption in there that, and again, referencing wind generation, no tax shall be imposed upon electricity which is produced for the personal consumption of the producer, including any excess production of electricity that does not exceed 500 kilowatt hours in a 24-hour period. So what exactly does that mean? I did some research for you in anticipation of that question. And so your general appliance is going to consume maybe 100, 200 a day. So you've really got to up on those solar or electrical generation to really exceed this threshold.
Yes, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was more talking about, I put up a solar field and I generate what I need and then I sell the rest back to the power companies. If I sell this back, won't I be eligible or required to pay the tax? Is my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator. So the way this statute reads is if you are going to generate any of this electricity, you would be required to pay that tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Any further questions? Mr. Fanning, you said you didn't do the fiscal note. The numbers here are pretty low. Like 114,000 and 76,000 of the general fund. Do you think these numbers are accurate, or do you need to take a harder look at those numbers?
So, Mr. Chairman, I did do some just general research to see kind of where we are in Wyoming, and these aren't out of the ballpark. And I didn't have any major concerns with these figures. However, I do think there are some folks behind me that can better testify to it.
Okay, appreciate it. Let's see, any other questions for Mr. Fanning? Department of Revenue, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Brown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chris Brown, representing Powering Up Wyoming. We are a grassroots organization that supports renewable energy alongside our legacy industries here in Wyoming, and we stand opposed to House Bill 124. Mr. Chairman, it's our position that as markets and demand continues to change, Wyoming needs to use every tool in our toolbox, coal, oil, gas, renewable energy, nuclear, et cetera, to maintain our status as an energy leader in the country. I think it's important to note, Mr. Chairman, that industrial solar does already pay full industrial rate property tax and full sales and use tax on all equipment in Wyoming. And so adding a third tax onto solar would make us significantly uncompetitive with our surrounding states. Mr. Chairman, it's also very important to note that the solar resource here in Wyoming is not nearly as strong as some of our competitive states. Southern Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah have a stronger solar resource than Wyoming does. And several of those states incentivize development in their states. And so adding a new tax onto solar is simply going to, from our perspective, push development to those other states. Mr. Chairman, I want to speak to your question about nuclear. You mentioned that nuclear is slated to pay a $5 per megawatt hour tax. My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that that tax only comes online after 2035 if 80% of the uranium needed for that nuclear plant is not derived here domestically. And so I believe that is an incentive to develop that uranium here in the United States versus getting that from another country. And so I don't believe it is as simple as saying nuclear is going to pay $5. But Mr. Chairman, my main point is that from our perspective, adding a new tax onto an industry seeking to invest in Wyoming isn't the way for us to get our way. Taxing our way to economic diversification, we do not believe is the right path forward. We hope that you'll oppose this bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm assuming from what you said, you kind of oversee the wind generation and all of that. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator McEwen, I don't personally, or my group does not oversee the wind generation, but we certainly speak in favor of policy that favors investment in the state.
So I have two questions. One, can you give me an idea of what the subsidy is for wind generation? If possible, broken down by each windmill. And two, haven't we sold 85% of our uranium to other countries already in Wyoming? And those are my two questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator McEwen. I'll do my best, but I can't answer those both to the extent that you probably wish for. Number one, your question about subsidies, that doesn't necessarily apply to this bill that we're speaking to, but the federal subsidies, which I assume you're referring to, apply to all clean energy sources, 2025 moving forward, renewable energy, carbon capture, et cetera. And so I know that the wind industry in the past handful of years has been stating at the federal level that we're okay with this subsidy sunsetting. I don't know where the current status of that is, Mr. Chairman. But the one point I bring up, because the subsidy discussion does come up frequently whenever wind is discussed, and I would say that incentive is not unique to Wyoming. Those projects in every state are able to receive that exemption, or a subsidy rather. And so policy in Wyoming seeking to offset that only puts Wyoming at a further competitive disadvantage with states around us, because those projects in every state receive that same consideration. I can't speak to the nuclear question, Senator McEwen.
Okay. All right. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Welcome to Senate Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dale Steenmorgan. I'm President CEO of the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce, as well as operating the Wyoming Business and Industry Federation, which are chambers of commerce all over the state. We represent over 10,000 businesses across the state right now. So I don't have anything as quippy, Mr. Chairman, as the golden goose. But I did have a past legislator from this body tell me the other day, he said, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. Problem is, that guy behind the tree is who we buy our apples from. So he isn't eating that cost, he's passing it right on to us. So in the energy industry, right, the government sets that rate. So you tax them, they pass that rate right on through to our citizens, to our small businesses, to our Main Street guys, and they pay that extra cost. That is true. We may sell some of that power out of state. So in that case, we're making ourselves less competitive. Those industries will decide not to operate here. So our friends won't have jobs and our neighbors won't have jobs, or their jobs will pay less because we're increasing that expense to those companies, right? I think we said it just right earlier, when there's no such thing as a company that pays taxes. We as citizens of this country pay taxes. And what do we want our communities to look like? And raising taxes is never good practice or plan to drive business forward. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you to get this put down and vote no, and not increase the taxes on our citizens across the state.
Thank you. And how do you say your last name?
Steenbergen,
Steenberg.
like the actress, but with no U.
Okay. Any questions? Questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Riemann.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We do stand in support of this legislation. Counties come at it from two perspectives. One, the need to establish parity amongst resources, and that's in part among all energy resources in the state of Wyoming, as well as among renewable resources in the state of Wyoming. As you know, we currently do have the $1 per megawatt charge on wind energy. We also come at it from the perspective of trying to provide certainty in the tax structure. The more certain that our tax structure is, the better it is for industry as a whole. And by having this decision made now at the earliest point, when we've only really got one commercial-sized solar project in the state, this will help us moving forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions, but we are supportive of this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Riemann. Any questions? Mr. Riemann. Must have done a good job. Thank you, sir. Mr. Jensen, welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob Jensen, speaking on behalf of the American Clean Power Association. American Clean Power Association represents companies in Wyoming that build and operate renewable resource generation plants, wind, solar, and probably on some storage coming soon. We're opposed to this tax increase. All of this has been said already. It's an issue mostly about competitiveness and the ability to attract the capital investment from the solar industry that does want to be here, but has options on where they can go. And you've heard that other states have programs that have incentives in place to attract this kind of capital investment. And so I would say that any tax increase on any of our forms of energy in Wyoming, we're an energy state, we're an energy exporter. We have every form of energy known to mankind in abundance, and this provides it to a broad variety of markets, not just in Wyoming, but nationally. And so any tax increase on any of that energy makes us less competitive. And I would say that particularly on solar, when you increase the tax on solar, the tax rate by $1, you run a serious risk of reducing the tax revenue, because the capital investment is likely not to come here and to go to other states around us, Utah, Colorado, South Dakota. We can see it now all the time. So that's a real risk. If we want the capital investment, we want the property tax that generates from these projects and the sales taxes that come with that. We need to be competitive with our neighboring states. Stand for any questions.
Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be quick. I'm not trying to be verbose today. I want to talk about bananas. It's a product, right? Just like energy is a product. There are many people who sell bananas. And at the end of the day, a banana is a banana is a banana. A megawatt of electricity is a megawatt of electricity, correct?
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, correct?
Correct.
So as I try to sell bananas, there are other companies who enjoy a great amount of advantage over me. So I have to come up with creative ways because I'm independently owned to sell my bananas. And I keep hearing this word competitiveness. I have to be competitive. I don't get to go to my neighbor's house and say, "Can I have some of your money so I could sell my bananas for the same price as that place out of Arkansas?" I don't get to do that. So as we talk about this clean energy and being competitive, we're setting them up on an unfair playing field. We're picking winners and losers. And my question is, you keep saying they're going to go to other places. If natural or clean energy is operating at a loss, wouldn't we be better off if they left the state? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator McEwen. That's, a perspective that I don't agree with. I don't think is personally a good thing to try and drive this capital investment to other states. We're talking about the generation of electricity to be generated here, essentially manufactured here and sold in other markets. And so that's a difference between buying something and then reselling it. So we're talking about trying to incent capital investment for the generation of this form of electricity to be sold to other markets. The question is the cost competitive? Are we competitive with the people that develop and build these power plants with other places where they can go to get to be incented to build those generation plants there? So it's a little different than your analogy, in my opinion. But the question is, do we want to have that kind of capital investment here for the 20 or 30 or longer time frame that it will be here generating that form of electricity that there are markets for? Do we want that here or don't we? And if we put taxes on the ability to have a company invest that capital here, they're probably, or in many cases, the risk is that they won't choose to make that capital investment here, and we will lose out on the tax revenue that we're talking about with this bill. We'll lose out on the property tax revenue that might come from that would come from that, and we'll lose out on the sales tax revenue that would come from that.
Okay. All right. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Any other comment? Hello. Welcome back.
Members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet, Wyoming Taxpayers Association. Per previous testimony, we look at the 4 cornerstones of taxation to evaluate all tax proposals. And today I just come before you on the basics on why we feel this is not sound tax policy and is not justified as it tries to modify behavior. It discourages solar power development in the state. It is not equitable as only Wyoming wind power plants producing electricity are subject to an excise tax. No other electricity produced by any other technologies are subject to an excise tax. Adding solar to an already unequal tax does not make it more equal. It is not stable as the tax only applies to solar and wind electricity, so it is not broad-based to limit that volatility. An imposition of this tax will only further the dilemma of Wyoming's reliance upon the minerals industry. It is not transparent as this is a stealth tax, hidden from ratepayers as regulated electricity generators would pass it through to the ratepayers. Ratepayers will not see the tax in their bill and already pay sales and use tax on the electricity they use. They would subject the ratepayers to double taxation on electricity without their knowledge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Harpstreet? Thank you. Hello.
Chairman Biteman, I'm Sarah Dorenzo. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Economic Development Association. WEDA represents over 200 economic developers communities and entities throughout the state that work to foster economic development and viability. Heard a lot of testimony today, so I'll be very brief. WEDA opposes this bill for much of the reasons you've already heard today, but I just want to reiterate that the solar policy should be a tool for economic developers, and if we take away that opportunity, it really does impact the recruitment and retention of businesses like you heard Ms. Hale talk about today. I understand that not everywhere in Wyoming is appropriate for solar, and not every community wants it, but we should leave that opportunity to the communities to decide if solar is good for them, and not through a tax that stifles economic development and job growth for communities that could benefit from solar. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I just hear you say the government's responsible for economic development? I thought that's what you were saying. And I would point out that of any industry we've gotten involved in, we've pretty much messed it all up. So do you believe government's responsible for economic development? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen,
Mm-hmm.
WEDA believes that if the government can provide tools that enable economic development, that's the role of government.
Okay. Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask you if you agree with something I'm about to say. If the government was not involved, if there weren't federal subsidies, federal money, moving all these tax dollars around, wouldn't the whole energy industry run more efficiently? Hence, really developing the economy? And isn't our job as a government entity to really provide a situation that invites people in, but does not do it on the backs of the taxpayers that already live here? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Enzo.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator McEwen, I'm not an expert on how all the energy industry works and the way these policies all fit together, but be happy to follow up with you after and have further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Anybody else? Mr. Detai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm Travis Detai. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. And we support this. And we think you should pass it along to the full body. If you would indulge me for a minute, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to run through our laundry list like I've done before. Right now in the state of Wyoming, your coal industry pays state rents and royalties, ad valorem taxes on property, abandoned mine lands fees, sales and use taxes, ad valorem taxes on production. We still pay, although not as much, we still pay federal mineral bonus payments. We pay severance taxes, we pay federal mineral royalties, and we pay black lung fees, which we don't even see here in the state of Wyoming. So we do see this as an issue of trying to get some sort of parity. Wyoming is dependent on its natural resources. I like this as a taxpayer because it means my taxes are low. We like paying the bills, and wind and solar are natural resources. And we think that $1 per megawatt hour is not too much to ask. One of the things that hasn't gotten talked about, when we talk about a market, I love it when we bring up the market. This is not a free market. There is a thumb on the scale. Released from the Bureau of Land Management from January 17th of this year, scoping meetings. And the director of the Bureau of Land Management says in her release, the BLM is committed to expanding renewable energy development on public lands. These are for meetings to explore potential solar, to how we can build more solar on federal lands. Half of the state of Wyoming is federally owned. That's where a lot of these things are going to be built. They're not going to stop coming here with $1 per megawatt hour tax. $369 million for renewable, or I'm sorry, 369 billion with a B in the Inflation Reduction Act going to prop up and support renewables in this country. It's not going to impact them. This is a way to get some parity. This is a way we welcome new taxpayers to the table to foot the bill for the state of Wyoming and to keep the tax burden low for our people. And yeah, you know what? It may go through to the taxpayer, but guess what? Elections have consequences, and this is the road we're on. Renewable energy costs money. Someone's got to pay for it. Carbon capture costs money. Someone's got to pay for it. That's where we're going. We welcome new taxpayers to the table. So, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage a yes vote from the committee, send this to the floor, and let it go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Detay. Any questions for Mr. Detay? Seeing none. Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman,
Good
I
to
got
see
off
you.
easy. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. All right. From one Travis to another. And Kara, good to see you. Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Travis McNevin here on behalf of Enel Renewable Energy. There is a lot before you here today, and some of the arguments. I would like to make just a couple of additional observations. This is a tax increasing bill. Taxes on industry, business, no matter the business, are never a good thing. Raising taxes as a general rule stifles growth, it stifles innovation, it stifles and distorts the markets, as has been talked about here today. Because of the question of equity, of what is equitable, is an interesting concept as you try to compare one industry to another, the pros and cons, the competitive advantages, subsidies that have been mentioned, the different resources that are available. As we look at a lot of places in this particular case with solar, a lot of places have sun. We've been fortunate enough that in the past and continuing on that the Powder River Basin, not everyone has the Powder River Basin. And that's been a great thing for the state of Wyoming. Montana has a lot of the Powder River Basin, but they put more taxes on their severance, and that's why the Powder River Basin more or less moved to Wyoming and not Montana, is because of that historical rate of tax. As been mentioned today, solar is at this point a fledgling industry. It is very small here. And if we want to be an all of the above energy state, Wyoming is an energy state. We have the infrastructure, we have the power lines, we have the transmission lines, we have all the infrastructure to continue to export electrons down the wire, be whatever electrons they are. And I think that continues to be a goal of the state of Wyoming for all energy sources. One thing that I'd also point out is that as we look to be with nuclear and hydrogen, hydrogen hub, these sorts of things, as we try to bring other industries to the state, which would be a great thing for us, that renewables and hydrogen and the idea of a clean energy supply chain, they all go together. And so you can't have hydrogen or a hydrogen industry without some of the other clean sources to go with it. And so at the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, this bill, in my view, is kind of stepping over a dollar to pick up a dime. There is a lot of revenue that may be lost from the current situation of sales and use tax, property taxes, then also other industries, as would be lost from the competitive disadvantage that Wyoming already has with other states as it relates to where solar goes. And with that, I'd certainly answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. McNiven? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The two Travises and Kara. Hey, my name is Kara Choquette. I work for two companies, Power Company of Wyoming and Transwest Express. Both are affiliates of the Anschutz Corporation. And in this role, I've been watching and tracking and monitoring what's been happening in the electricity markets for Wyoming and electricity taxation in Wyoming. First of all, as a farm and ranch kid, I have to say I do love the goose and horse analogies. That speaks to my heart. So thank you for doing that. Respecting our time, I think I just wanted to kind of take a little bit of a different take on this. I would urge you respectfully to vote no on House Bill 124. Since the topic of taxing electricity either at a higher rate or a different rate or something else, adding electricity tax, to my review of LSO data, there hasn't been any revenue committee that has ever supported a tax increase on electricity in any form. The data that I wanted to share with you is really from the United States has it's the Energy Information Administration that tracks all forms of power in the United States. And so just to help you kind of see what is that regional context and national context, the first two slides are the EIA data showing where are all the existing wind and solar projects in this region. And as you can see, and as had been stated, there isn't a lot in Wyoming. There is just one under the existing tax framework and the existing regulatory framework, which has been made tougher through bringing solar projects under the Industrial Siting Act. So, you know, the siting concerns are taken care of through that process, as well as, you know, county permitting processes as well. So that just gives you a sense of what's happening nationwide. The third slide is new data out from the Energy Information Administration that shows where are the new plants expected to come online in 2023. And as you can see, there's a lot of solar as well as other generation coming online in 2023, but none of that new power plant capacity is coming online in Wyoming or Idaho. Hard to tell a little bit on the more crowded eastern states, but in the western states where we generally compete, as well as with the service territories that encompass Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota, Wyoming and Idaho are the only states where there isn't any new power capacity coming online. Skipping ahead then to slide 4 is just sort of one of the things that I think Wyoming is very interested in watching. And, you know, the word energy is a great word. It encompasses a lot of things. Again, Senator McEwen, I love your grocery store analogy. So I think of Wyoming as the energy store. How do we sell all of these different products from the energy store? Again, my dad was a cattleman. I will support beef all day long, but there are going to be people who want to buy lamb and veal and chicken and other products. And how do we as a state provide and serve all those different markets and all those different niches? And when you look at just electricity overall, the amount of electricity that is produced in Wyoming, according to EIA data, has only gone up 5%, but what we export has actually gone down 8% since 1990. And right now, only about 58% of Wyoming's total electricity supply is exported. So about 42% stays in the state and is paid for by citizens and businesses in Wyoming, as you've heard about. The last two slides are just really looking at what are the trends overall and where does our electricity come from. And EIA data shows that they have this definition of what is an electric utility. And in general, the electric utility segment, as you can see on slide 5, is pretty flat. Washington and Arizona are kind of all over the place because that encompasses federal hydro, and that changes a lot year to year. Arizona, that's specifically Hoover Dam. But the real growth opportunity is on slide 6, and that's wholesale power supplies. Wholesale power generation is the growing market in the power plant sector. Wholesale or IPP, independent power projects, are generally wind and solar. In the future, some nuclear and geothermal, but this is where Wyoming is last among all of the Western states in the amount of wholesale power that is generated. And it's also less than what is made in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. So again, I would urge caution and certainly not moving forward. 124, it's a really complicated topic, as you know, markets. We've had lots of hearings over the years of many hours of testimony, and think that this is not an issue or a bill to move forward at this time. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Choquette. Any questions? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love farm analogies too. So your father's selling cattle, right?
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Would your father then bring lambs in and sell lambs if he wasn't making any money off of it and wasn't getting any subsidies off of it? or would he just keep selling cattle at a profit? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Choquette.
Not to speak for my father, but I would anticipate that he's a cattleman and he loves grazing and he loves his cows. He will always be a cattleman, but he will respect there's other markets and his neighbors may choose to raise lamb, or his neighbors may choose to raise turkeys or geese or other produce products that could be sold to those markets. But he's a cattleman through and through, and that's the business that he would choose to stay in. But like I said, with respect, we're respecting that his neighbors may choose to sell other products to meet those other market needs.
Okay. Any more farm analogies? All right. Seeing
Darn.
none. Thank you, Ms. Choquette.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. We are running out of time. It's 1:58. We got to get back to the floor. Do we have anybody else that's dying to testify on this bill? Seeing none, what about on Zoom?
Have Cindy Delancey, she doesn't have her hand up at the moment. Now she does.
Okay, Ms. Delancey, jump in.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. In the essence of time, I know you're way short. I just wanted to jump in and let you know that the Business Alliance does oppose House Bill 124 and ask for your no vote on it. We've heard quite a bit of testimony today, so I certainly won't reiterate what's been said, but two things that I just kind of wanted to leave you with. I have not seen the Senate Revenue Committee pass new taxes in a long, long time. And essentially, not only the testimony has been this would be a new tax, but we would also have to grow government to implement this new tax, as heard from the staff at the Department of Revenue. And then secondly, this concept around certainty really matters in the business community. And we already have a solar project on the ground, as well as numerous others in the works, slated to be constructed. So that, the notion of kind of changing course midstream really, it puts Wyoming in a disadvantage when we're signaling to the world that, we're not really set on our policy choices. So, to promote that certainty, consistency, to have that predictability for projects that are coming to Wyoming, I think it's really important that House Bill 124 not advance. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you remotely today.
Thank you, Ms. Delancey. Any questions for Ms. Delancey? I have a question for you. I hear this a lot today about not raising taxes and all that, but this wind tax came online in 2010, and would you support repealing the $1 megawatt wind tax? And I guess I would ask that to all of you out there, because I am for that, obviously, but I would just be curious to hear your thoughts, Ms. Delancey, if we brought a bill as a revenue committee bill to get rid of that $1 per megawatt wind tax. Would you guys support that?
Mr. Chairman, certainly it'd be worthy of a conversation. All items are on the table for the membership of the Business Alliance. Really what my testimony is driven towards is just kind of developing a policy that's predictable, stable, and that people can count on when they come. So those dollars have already been factored into wind projects that are, currently on the ground, as well as, planning. So taking that back certainly probably would be advantageous, to a company, certainly, but going forward is what I'm talking about. Like when you go down, sure, there's really no consequence. When you go up is where the unforeseen consequences come about additional costs that weren't anticipated when a project was planned and slated for Wyoming. So happy to have the discussion with you and anyone else that would love to talk about these matters as far as making sure that Wyoming remains competitive and strong regionally to attract business, to help our people get high-paying jobs and stay working.
Thank you. And follow up to that would be, we've tried to go down even this session, and going down creates a lot of acrimony amongst the people who think we're taking tax dollars away from schools, we're taking tax dollars away from cities, towns, and counties, and we've got to figure out how to replace that income. So I don't think we can go down either. obviously the will of this body is no, we can't go down. We obviously can't go up. We're just stuck in tax purgatory where we've got a really messed up tax code and we can't do anything to fix it. That seems to be the general consensus. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I would agree with that. We have a messed up tax code and can't do anything about it. But I certainly will offer to you, that I stand at the ready to be your partner in figuring out these conversations forward from the private sector's perspective. These are all series of policy choices that you and your elected colleagues are making together, and the best information that I can help provide you to make good decisions as far as moving our state forward. You have that commitment for me in the Wyoming Business Alliance. So thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, any further questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Ms. Delancey. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill. Oops, sorry, throwing pens around. Okay, moved by Senator Pappas. I have an amendment. Unless somebody else has an amendment first, I'll let you guys go first. LSO, I sent it earlier this morning, but it just came in through the email, so I don't have it to pass out. But basically the concept is, and I have it here to read it to you, but it is going to take the tax rate from nuclear from $5 to $1 and make conforming amendments. It fits within the bill title. It's acts related to taxation, amending taxation on the production of electricity as specified. So it's certainly not, doesn't violate our rules or is not unconstitutional. In my opinion, it makes it all the same. If we're going to tax electricity generation from one source at $1 a megawatt hour, we better do it for everybody or not do it at all. So that's where I'm coming from on that. I'll stand for any questions. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you run by that just real quick
bet.
one more time? I didn't quite, so
If you want to track it in on your bill, page 1, line 7, delete and, put a comma, then after 3922-107A, insert and 3923-104. That's the imposition of the
back up here real
nuclear.
quick. I just got to it here. Let's see. Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Page 1,
Wilson.
line 7.
Okay,
It's in the section 1.
right.
Delete and after 3922-107A, insert a comma and 3923-104. 39-23-104 is your imposition of the excise tax on nuclear power generation. So then you would go to page 2, after line 18, we would create a paragraph which we would insert 39-23-104 taxation rate, which brings in the nuclear power rate. And the tax rate shall be, and we would strike $5 and insert $1 on each megawatt hour or portion thereof which is sold, which mirrors the language in solar and nuclear and wind. So basically, wind, solar, and nuclear would be on the same playing field, taxation wise.
So if I understand you right, we'd be raising the taxes on solar, but we would be lowering them on uranium or on
nuclear.
No, nuclear. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, we don't have, as Mr. Fanning said, the nuclear power generation hasn't occurred yet. And we've seen very little, if you look at your fiscal note, we've seen very little solar generation at this point too. So the time to fix it's now before everybody gets off and running. And then we're gonna have the same problem that we heard during testimony. Oh, you can't change the rules of the game halfway through the game, which I agree. So solar's not quite there yet. Nuclear hasn't got started yet. So if we set the ground rules now, we'll let the market compete it out. And that's the thought process.
So effectively, it's a wash. I mean, we're not voting for a tax increase.
Effectively, I think if the fiscal note is accurate, it would be a tax increase of about 100,000 or under $200,000. The amendment doesn't change any of that. It's just it's a tax policy question. Are we going to have wind at $1 a megawatt? Are we going to have solar at 0 and nuclear at $5 in true Wyoming fashion? And then it makes no sense? Or are we going to try to level it out for everybody going forward? And so the future revenue committee doesn't have to come back and try to fix it. Thoughts?
You know what it,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, do we know what the cost to collect that 100,000 in taxes is?
Mr. Fanning knows that, and he's going to come up and tell us. Aren't you, Mr. Fanning? And also, I had a question for you. You heard that question, but my question for you is, you mentioned the administrative impact to the Department of Revenue to get on the same system. Do you have a dollar amount for that so we can put in appropriation?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. The fiscal note on this one is $595,000. And I do want to very briefly touch on why this is a little more complicated. So the way the distribution statutes work is that 60% goes to the county, 40% goes to the state. However, it's proportionally distributed to each county based upon the percentage of assessed value of the generating facilities located within the county as compared to the total assessed value. So this distribution for wind and solar is a little different than what you normally see. Again, to your point that you've just been making for the past couple minutes.
So, Mr. Fanning, is there any room in your current budget to absorb most of the costs, to look at this in a transition period to, instead of, I mean, if we tacked on a $600,000 fiscal note to a bill that only brings in $200,000 of revenue, it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense.
Mr. Chairman, the answer to your question is no. Right now, we don't have that in our budget to be able to float. To your point, yes, that has been a topic since my last testimony regarding this bill. Is you're talking about a couple $100,000 in solar generation taxes, if the fiscal note is correct, and there's nothing to say it isn't, but then you have this impact of $600,000 as an appropriation. Now, the return on investment, you've got to go out a couple of years. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, one other quick thing. This return, this additional return, the IT programming is included in our maintenance contract, and it would not include additional personnel staffing wise. It's just an IT programming cost.
I'm in the wrong line of work, Mr. Fanning.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Should have went to IT. Anyway. So we're on the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Everybody understand what it does?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm still a little foggy on this.
All right. Well, let's just vote it up or vote it down.
Okay.
All those in favor of Senator Beitman's motion to my amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are those opposed? We got one no. Okay, so it has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Committee. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Senator Beitman, Chairman Beitman. I'm confused still a little bit. I mean, I get where you're going with this, and I like that, actually. But just the fiscal note and listening to, you know, all of the conversation from the experts on taxes and stuff, I don't think I can get behind this. I think I'm a nay vote on this thing, but
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chair McEwen.
I know that megawatts are not bananas, but I do know if I have to pay $600,000 or $595,000 for the privilege to sell $100,000 worth of bananas, this isn't a good decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand where you're going. I think it needs to be an interim topic on how to level out all these, if include coal and the rest of them. If a ton of coal's producing X amount of megawatts of electricity, it should be paired with somebody that has the solar and net metering back. So these all be the same. I think it'd be a lot easier, but I'm probably a no vote on this.
All right, Senator Pappas, you want to go bananas? I'm good. All right. Judy, call the roll.
Senator French,
No.
Senator Ide,
No.
Senator McEwen,
No.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Chairman Beitman.
No.
Mr.
That
Chairman,
was a
there were
waste of time.
5 noes on House Bill 120.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes our business. It clears the desk. Note, tomorrow, we will have our last meeting to take up House Bill 121 Property Tax Deferral Program Amendments. It'll be tomorrow, February 22nd, right here upon noon recess. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Thank you.